I don't know, the Social Justice Committee of Temple Addis, Israel, who's sponsoring this for a minute, and then we'll get started with our program.
So, hi, my name is Alyssa Peak. I am the co-chair of the Social Justice Committee at Temple Adas, Israel. The Social Justice Committee was started in 2019 after the shootings at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. And we all came together to really build, our goal is to build bridges in our community. We are really Sag Harbor East End focused, and our goal is really to create a loving community so we can all live in peace. So thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Alyssa. My name is Andy Klasner, and I am Alyssa's co-chair, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you here tonight to talk with our illustrious panel about the scourge of hate crimes and the latest steps that Suffolk County is taking to identify and prosecute these crimes, as well as to forge productive relationships between law enforcement and our communities. This program is being sponsored by the Social Justice Committee of Temple Addis, Israel in Sag Harbor, along with a number of interested organizations, including the American Jewish Committee, the Center for Social Justice and Human Understanding, Progressive East End Reformers, East End Action Network, OLA of Eastern Long Island, the Southampton and Riverhead Anti-Bias Task Forces, the NAACP, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the South Fork, and the League of Women Voters. Thanks also to the Southampton Democratic Committee for helping us to publicize the event. And thank you to Rabbi Dan for being so supportive of our programming. As we are all too aware, there has been a rise in bigotry and hate crimes across the country in the past 4 years against persons of color, Jews, immigrants, Latinxers, Asians, and the LGBTQ community. Recently, Suffolk County announced the launch of the Hate Crimes Task Force, consisting of specially trained prosecutors to work with police departments across the county to investigate bias-motivated crimes and bring enhanced charges where appropriate. Here to talk with us about that tonight are three of our esteemed county officials. Suffolk County District Attorney Tim Sini assumed his office in 2018 and is committed to creating a culture of compliance with the highest ethical standards in order to best ensure the safety and well-being of all the residents of Suffolk County. Also in 2018, Sheriff Errol Toulon assumed his role as Suffolk County's 67th sheriff and the first African-American to be elected to a non-judicial countywide office. Bridget Fleming was elected to the Suffolk County Legislature for the 2nd Legislative District in 2015 and serves as chair of the Ways and Means Committee, vice chair of Public Works, Transportation and Energy, vice chair of Public Safety, and a member of the Environment, Parks, and Agriculture Committee, Veterans and Consumer Affairs Committee, and Health Committee. When do you sleep, Bridget? Welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining us for this important discussion. So we're going to chat for about 30 to 40 minutes with our panelists, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. We're hoping to end by around 8, but if we go a little longer, there'll be a hard stop at 8:15. So if you have questions, get ready to send them in on the chat room, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Okay, so let's begin. This question is for Tim. Could you describe for all of us who may not be familiar with legal terms of what is a hate crime? How does it differ from a criminal act that's not deemed to be a hate crime? And are the consequences for a conviction of a hate crime greater?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. And I want to say thank you to my fellow panelists, Sheriff Toulon and Legislator Fleming, who are great partners in our pursuit of justice here in Suffolk County. So New York State has a specific statute that sets forth what is a hate crime. It's in Article 485 in the penal law. Interestingly, there's not necessarily a substantive hate crime statute with a couple exceptions. It's actually an enhancement that builds upon existing crimes. So the way it works is there's a list of specified offenses, and there's dozens of offenses, including assault, criminal trespass, burglary, criminal mischief, arson, and many more. It basically, when the prosecution can prove that the defendant selected the victim or committed the crime out of a belief or perception on the basis of a protected class like race, ethnicity, sexual preference, gender, age, then there's an enhancement to that crime. So I'll give you a perfect example. It's very straightforward. If you punch someone in the face over a dispute regarding money, that could be an assault third or an assault second degree. However, if you punch someone in the face because that person is a particular color, race, ethnicity, there's an enhancement. And so say if it's an E felony, because you selected the victim on the basis of that protected class, it goes to a D felony. If you commit a D felony and it's because of someone's status or perception of someone's status in a protected class, it goes to a D and C and so on and so forth. So it's essentially a sentencing enhancement. And what the prosecution has to prove, they have to prove the underlying elements of the offense. So say, for example, an assault, that the person punched someone and they intended to punch them, and that there was physical injury. And then in a hate crime scenario, when you're applying that enhancement, you then have to prove also that the defendant selected the victim based on a protected class or committed the crime because of a protected class. And normally it certainly arises when you're dealing with people who are evincing some sort of animus towards someone on the basis of one of these protected classes, but it's not always such. For example, we have one of our pending hate crime prosecutions. The defendants targeted the elderly because they believed that they were more vulnerable to victimization. Sometimes you'll see folks target undocumented individuals because they feel that perhaps they'll be less likely to report it to law enforcement. So certainly it could be sort of that traditional animus, racism, bigotry, but it also can be defendants strategically selecting victims based on status.
Realistically, if somebody doesn't make a statement out loud that would indicate that kind of animus, is it difficult to prove?
Certainly there can be difficulties, right? You're essentially proving motive, and normally prosecutors don't have to prove motive. Certainly a statement by the defendant is probative, and we have cases where we have that. We have several pending hate crime prosecutions where we do have statements during the actual act of the crime. If you don't have that, or even if you do have that, you want to ensure that you're doing a thorough investigation, including but not limited to looking at the social media usage of the defendant. There could be something in the defendant's history that is probative of why that crime was committed.
Yeah, that's important. And that's why we all tell our children not to post things on social media that they don't want to come back to them. Can you tell us some more about the actual hate crimes task force itself? How is the work going to be carried out? How are you funding this? Who's going to sit on the task force? I know that in the press release it mentioned that you would have prosecutors going to work with law enforcement around the county. Are there other members of the task force besides prosecutors?
Yes. So the task force consists of specially trained prosecutors. There's 8 prosecutors in my office who serve on the task force. And then the Suffolk County Police Department's Hate Crimes Unit, which is a specialized unit devoted to investigating hate crimes. And we're doing outreach to all of the village and town departments, because remember, Suffolk County, while the Suffolk County Police Department is the largest police department and serves the 5 western towns, we have village and town police departments on the east end and even within the police district in the 5 western towns. So it also includes representatives from the various police departments. And it also includes the Suffolk County Human Rights Commission, where we've partnered with them in one particular way. where we offer an educational program to defendants who are charged with hate crime. So in addition to whatever other sentence they may receive from the court, there's also the option of mandating that they go through what's called Stop Bias, which is an educational program that's designed to raise awareness about intolerance and bigotry. And the second phase of Stop Bias includes a component where a member of the group that was targeted in that particular case speaks to the defendant. It's a form of restorative justice.
Mhm. Have you thought at all about, I know you mentioned the Human Rights Commission is involved, and I'm sure that, because I serve on the local Southampton Anti-Bias Task Force, there are people with a variety of backgrounds, but specifically, do you also try to work with psychologists and educators, as well as law enforcement, to try to get at the root causes of hate and why we're seeing these enhanced acts of bigotry?
Oftentimes, as part of the case, there will be a psychological report that is ordered by the court, and prosecutors and the court can consider that report in fashioning an appropriate sentence. So the short answer is absolutely yes. And you mentioned some of these anti-bias task forces throughout the county. I know Legislator Fleming works very closely with the many advisory groups in the county, and certainly there's a role for all of us to play on this front.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to address the next question to both Tim and Bridget. If a resident believes that they have been the victim of a hate crime or believe they have witnessed a hate crime, what should they do?
Well, I can jump in just to say, first of all, I want to say thank you for including me in this panel. I feel a little outweighed by these two heavy hitters you brought in here on this issue. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I'm going to defer to both of them in terms of reporting crime, because as a former assistant district attorney myself, I mean, I think the first thing you need to think about is calling the police, and how you do that. You know, there are various ways to do that. Certainly you can call 1-800-TIPS. There is a hate crimes unit in the Suffolk County Police Department that's been there for many, many years. But also I'm sure that Tim and the sheriff have more specific recommendations. I do want to just respond to one thing that your questions, Andy, bring to light already about the hate crimes task force. I mean, I think ascribing a specific focus, as the district attorney has done, in cooperation with his partners around law enforcement and government, really does help to sort of move things in another direction. We're going against some headwinds here because we see so many leaders throughout the nation really pushing messages of hate and sort of encouraging a siege mentality almost by folks who they want to incite or to feel as though they should be afraid of people who are not like themselves. And it's a very dangerous moment in our community. So I think in communities throughout the US and even across the globe. So I think this effort by Tim, along with some legislation and other things that folks are doing throughout our communities, really does kind of shift it so that we're not working against normalizing the idea of hate and normalizing hate as a political weapon. So I just did want to throw that in there. I'm happy to address some legislative stuff that's been done along those lines, similar to the hate crimes task force. But I think it's very important to recognize that there's a normalizing that's happened because of these hate messages that are coming from the very top leadership in our country and around the world. And so I really do applaud the DA and the folks who have been part of this hate crime task force, because it just sends a message. It's going to be working in a practical way. And at the same time, it also sends a critically important message at an important time in our history. Sorry, I just went on a tangent, but I think in terms of reporting, I'll turn it over to the DA and the sheriff.
Yeah, so of course, on emergency situations, crime in progress, you want to call 911. in terms of reporting a past crime, maybe you receive some information, you have several options. You can call the Hate Crimes Unit of the Suffolk County Police Department at 631-852-6323. And maybe we can write that in the chat box so people have it. You can also email my office at infoda@suffolkcountiny.gov. The important part is in emergencies, call 911. And then when in situations where you're reporting a past incident, you have the Hate Crimes Unit and you have my office that you can report it to. Also, as Legislator Fleming can speak to, the Human Rights Commission is taking a more active role as a result of the reform measures that were adopted by the county executive and the Suffolk County Legislature. And certainly they have the apparatus and the ability to take in calls too. Because oftentimes we're talking about people who are vulnerable, right? And so folks may not have the trust with law enforcement where they feel comfortable reporting a crime. And so there are other options like the Human Rights Commission.
Yeah, that's exactly why I brought up. And Errol, if you want to jump in, feel free. But I included Bridget because we've seen too many times some of the abuses that have taken place by not good cops, and nobody in this room we're talking about. But there is a lot of fear of, because of the rhetoric in this country and the temperature that we're at. People are afraid. Many people are afraid to call the police or report a crime. So if so, can they reach out to their legislator's office as a starting point, as well as call 911? The people on this call will now know, thanks to you, that they can also reach out to the Human Rights Commission. But I was just wondering if there are other ways for people who may be afraid to put themselves out there.
I think certainly, my office is always open to take concerns of any kind from constituents. But I'll tell you, as a former prosecutor, I do think it's important to get to the right person as soon as possible. And the Human Rights Commission is the right place to go after the Reform and Reinvention Task Force has completed both the sheriff's report and the report by the county, Suffolk County Police Department and the task force that was involved there. I know all the individual departments have also done their own Reform and Reinvention Task Force. So, but I think most people in their reports recognize the Human Rights Commission as the place to go if you have a complaint along those lines. There was a lot of discussion about the potential of an independent inspector general, or what in New York City is the CCRB, the Citizens Complaint Review Board. Here, after this reform effort, the Human Rights Commission has been identified as the place where folks should go if they have complaints specifically about use of force or bias by the police department. And that phone number is 631-853-5480. Traditionally, historically, the Human Rights Commission has been focused on discrimination in employment, in housing, and in various aspects of civil life. And crimes are really handled by the district attorney's office and the police department. But now, since this reform effort, if you're speaking specifically to complaints regarding treatment by police, you can call the Human Rights Commission directly.
Errol, did you want
Andrea, if I may, there are a few things how the stuff. First of all, again, I echo the sentiments of the panelists, thanking you and the panel for allowing me to speak today. But the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office is involved because we assist the District Attorney's Office in sometimes gathering intelligence with the amount of information that we get inside the jails regarding a particular crime. So while they may not have all the pieces when a crime occurs, some of the intelligence that we're able to gather assist the District Attorney's Office in the crimes that have been committed that they're seeking to prosecute. Secondarily, the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office, we put together a team to understand the ACE, the adverse childhood effects of what occurs with individuals, why certain crimes are committed, whether there's substance abuse, mental health issues, hate crimes. We're looking at all of those type of factors within the Sheriff's Office. And more poignantly, last week we recognize a young lady from Comac High School who won our essay contest, the Sandy Hook Promise. And she was an Asian student that spoke about how each week she has dinner with her grandparents on the weekend. And because of what occurred against the Asian community in California, the Asian community in New York City, she's now fearful that she may not have that dinner with her grandparents on the weekend. And so I would be happy to share her essay with you, because it really hit home the discussion that we're having today regarding hate crimes, specifically what's going on with the Asian community.
Thank you.
I can add also, Andy, that the Suffolk County, another resource in Suffolk County is the Office of Minority Affairs. And the Office of Minority Affairs is responsible for sort of cohering a group of advisory committees or advisory boards that include the African American Advisory Board, the Hispanic Advisory Board, the Asian American Advisory Board, the Muslim American Advisory Board, and the Jewish Advisory Board. And there is a core leadership group that meets quarterly to discuss the work of all those advisory groups, and they issue an annual report. But I can offer a phone number for that group as well, which offers technical assistance, particularly to community-based organizations. So they can provide you with speakers, for instance, if or a community organization want further education on these issues. That number is 631, and I'll put it in the chat, Rabbi Dan, this time. It's 631-853-4738. Their office is also up in the Dennison building in Hauppauge. And those groups have been around for quite some time with varying activities at different times in history. Like now we're seeing nationwide a spike in Asian hate. So those groups are there to help the community navigate the challenges that are presented by specific acts of hate, specific animated by bias against specific groups.
Right. That's very helpful. Thank you. And that is a nice segue into my next question, which is for all three of you, however you want to address it. Let's get specific. Let's talk about the statistics in Suffolk County. What is the demographic composition of Suffolk County, first of all? And where have you seen the biggest rise in hate crimes geographically? And also, what groups have been targeted the most? And have you also seen a rise in hate crimes against, you referred to Asian Americans, Errol, because of what's been going on with COVID? Have you seen a spike of hate crimes against Asian Americans in Suffolk County?
Thank you for that question. And I think it was my assignment to provide the specific demographics. And as we were preparing for this discussion, one of the reasons why I thought it was very important is because the overwhelming majority in Suffolk County can sometimes make it challenging. This lovely essay that Errol refers to really sort of highlights how isolated Asian Americans in particular can feel because of the numbers. So Suffolk County is 80.7% white. Blacks make up 7.8%, Native Americans 0.3%, Asian Americans 3.9%, other races 5%, and two or more races 2.3%. 19.3% of our Suffolk County community identifies as Latinx or Hispanic, and 7% identifies as Jewish. So we really are sort of facing some significant headwinds in terms of inclusivity and just the question of people feeling safe in coming forward. So I really applaud you for allowing us to kind of amplify these messages, because it can be challenging for people who feel alone or, part of a very small group.
Absolutely. And can the three of you also address, there must have been, or was there a specific motivation other than what's been going on generally in the country was there a specific motivation for creating the hate crimes task force in Suffolk County at this time? Have you seen a rise in hate crimes here, and in what areas the most, and against which vulnerable groups?
So while we haven't seen a specific increase here in Suffolk County in terms of the crime statistics, we're concerned that a lot of these incidents may go unreported. And so we felt that it was important to come together and get the message out that law enforcement and county government and community stakeholders are here to protect all of our communities. And in terms of those incidents that we do have documented, one, I want to make sort of a distinction between two types of incidents. We have sort of hate crimes, which we talked about at the outset, what a hate crime is. But then we have hate incidents that do not rise to the level of a crime, but we still, as law enforcement, want to know. Errol talked about collecting intelligence, and that's an important part of what we do as law enforcement officials. Not every single piece of information that we collect will lead to the prosecution of a crime, but it's important to know if the KKK is dropping leaflets in a particular neighborhood, we want to know about that, even though that particular act is protected First Amendment speech. In terms of the groups that are targeted here in Suffolk County, we have active cases involving members of the LGBTQ community, Latinx community, the elderly. We have anti-Semitic cases. In terms of frequency, the sort of highest categories that are reported, it's anti-Black and anti-Semitic.
Thank you. Earl, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, actually, I'm trying to get Melody's essay so I can forward it to you so you can send it to the group.
That would be great. I would love that. I would love to read that. I'm sure it's incredibly moving and disturbing. So let me ask all of you, do you have suggestions for how we, as community members and community groups who are interested in social justice and racial justice, how do we work with you, with law enforcement, with Suffolk County government, to help create a climate that will lower the temperature that we've seen in this country over the past 4 years? And will you commit to working with community groups like the ones that are co-sponsoring this to sponsor programs on education and awareness? And can you tell us, Bridget, you mentioned some other county programs. Tim, you mentioned the Stop Bias program. Errol, I think you wanted to talk about your work in the schools. Can you tell us any other county programs that you haven't mentioned so far that already exist, and how we can get involved working with you?
I think from my perspective, before COVID, hit the United States, I was in 1 to 2 schools per week talking to students about bullying, vaping, opioids, and gangs, which I felt was very important for me to not only break down the barrier between the law enforcement community and the perception from young adults. And unfortunately, after what tragically occurred to George Floyd, has really put us on the opposite side of where I wanted us to be at this point, now in my tenure as a sheriff. And so it's now re-engaging with the community to gain that trust, and also let them know that we're partners. And part of the reason why I'm here is because I love to speak to people, especially with the difficult conversations that do occur sometimes when there is that perception that we are not doing our jobs properly or things are not going as well. And we're human beings also, and I just want to continue this conversation, not just after today's talk or today's Zoom meeting, that we continue to discuss these tough topics, the dialogue, to make sure that not only our communities are safe, that individuals feel safe walking around, doing the things that we love to do in Suffolk County, and more importantly, that law enforcement will not only take those complaints seriously, but also act upon them, investigate them, and really work to try and get the individuals that are committing any crimes out here in Suffolk County.
I can say, Andy, the last time I was at the temple at Addis, Israel, was for an active shooter drill that the Suffolk County Police Department and Chief McGuire from Sag Harbor and the Chief Sarlo from East Hampton all gathered in the temple to to sort of educate people on how to stay safe. So it was the police department that stepped in and stepped up to educate people how to stay safe after that horrible incident in Pittsburgh. And so it's a complex relationship, and everybody here on your panel is law enforcement or former law enforcement. So I want to echo what the sheriff said, that that by and large, police department is made up of, and the sheriff's department and the DA's office are made up of people who have the best interests of the community at heart and keep us safe from these terrible crimes, or prosecute them when they happen. So, it is a complex relationship, and we want to be able to support a good dialogue and again, those very tough conversations. One of the things that we see at the legislature is opportunities to continue to build education, to build an understanding of where our history is, because we are a very segregated island, and we've been very segregated over history. As a matter of fact, tomorrow at the general meeting of the legislature, the Suffolk County Legislature will be considering a bill, believe it or not, that waives the fees for the amending of deeds that include restrictions on the purchase of a home based on your race or your religion. And when we talk at the legislature about this bill, and one legislator was dumbfounded that such language existed in deeds and still exists in deeds, we heard from more than one legislator whose parents were unable to purchase a home in the neighborhood they wanted to, one because they were Jewish and one because they were African American. That's a generation ago. And this language still exists in the deed. Of course, the 1968 Fair Housing Act prohibited discrimination like that. But there are thousands of deeds on Long Island, titles to homes, that still contain this incredibly offensive language that we think is ancient history. It's not ancient history to the extent that an intelligent and thoughtful legislator saw fit to help people remove this offensive language without having to pay a fee for amending the deeds. That's happening tomorrow. So I think when we talk about lifting the conversation, shifting what is perceived as normal, when we've had this new wave of anti-Asian hate, of anti-Jewish hate, of anti-African American hate, we need to recognize that we are, in the course of history, we are just a blip away from some very, very difficult relationships. And so I think we should all look for opportunities like the legislator who introduced, Legislator Richburg, who introduced that bill. We should all look for opportunities to continue to reverse the normalization of hate between races, and particularly of the majority against those who the majority perceives to be different from themselves.
Amen. Tim or Errol, did you have anything to add to that?
Just to plug another county program that perhaps Legislator Fleming is referring to in terms of the active shooter drill that you all just went through. That's SCPD Shield, which is a great program. You can go to scpdshield.org and sign up. It's for organizations, businesses. It's to develop a partnership between the private sector and community organizations and law enforcement, in particular the Suffolk County Police Department, to essentially make us less vulnerable to victimization, from mass shooting incidents to things like burglary. It's a great program. They do trainings, they do workshops, tabletop drills. There's also exciting technological opportunities. We have now a real-time crime center that can actually suck in the CCTV feed from companies and other organizations, and this will help in response to an active shooter situation, because we can push that video down to law enforcement who is responding to the scene. So there's all sorts of benefits to joining this program.
Tim, that brings me to, before we open up questions to the audience here, I received a few questions prior to tonight, and your response leads me to one of these questions, which is the topic of gun control. Do you believe gun control is an important factor in limiting the consequences of bigotry and hate crimes?
Well, certainly when people who are intent on committing bad acts have access to semi-automatic rifles and large capacity magazines, that's going to potentially add to the lethality of any incident. There's been a series of laws passed in New York State, including the red flag law, that are aimed to address some of these situations. But it's something that I think our country obviously is struggling with in many parts of the country. Here in Suffolk County, we enforce our gun laws. Obviously, there are federal laws, but then there are also state laws. Another big issue too is when you look at the FBI reports of active shooter situations, well over 50%. I think the number is high, is in the 70 percentile of individuals who ultimately commit an act of mass violence indicated some intent to do so prior to the incident. So we need to be looking at everything. We also have to be looking. We have to put everyone on alert that if there is someone in your community that is expressing, evincing an intent to harm others, that has to be brought to the forefront. It has to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to insert my personal feelings for a second and to address this question to Bridget, I do believe that when people are going to engage in a hate crime, just by the nature of that crime, the more easily accessible weapons are, and weapons, semi-automatic and military style weapons are, the more damage can be done. And we saw 9 mass shootings around the country this past weekend alone. Bridget, if you are elected to Congress, will you commit to trying to get more gun control in place?
Oh, absolutely. And I would just add to Tim's list of important regulation, the idea of background checks, because it's just that I think Tim's office just indicted someone in Manorville who had a series of hate crime conduct, really alarming, and an automatic weapon in the home. So according to the allegations, so there's just no question that high capacity magazines and restricting high capacity magazines and also sensible background checks would go such a long way for reducing the lethality of hate. It's one thing to have a hateful thought, a thought of hatred. It's another to be able to translate that instantly into widespread lethality, which is what we've seen and which is so frightening. We have in Northwell Health recently, the hospital system recently enacted a policy whereby in the emergency room, if someone is displaying suicidal ideation, there is a standard question now: is there a gun in the home? Which is really very forward thinking. You would think many hospitals do it, but they don't. The reason why it's so important is that impulsive moment from which you can't walk back. The harm that you've done is known to be reversible in cases of suicide, that if you don't offer somebody the opportunity to take her life or his life so quickly, that chances are they will not do it. The stats hold that up. But it's the same thing when you see these horrific shootings that we've seen, like in Atlanta, and well, throughout the country, there have been so many now, but based on hate, where someone just has the ability, because of this very porous system of acquiring guns that we have, and guns that have no real place in sport, like an automatic weapon, it just translates into a person being able to do far more damage than is really humane to even think about.
Absolutely.
You know, Andrea, the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office is tasked with going out and confiscating firearms once an ERPO, which is an extreme risk protection order, has been issued. And it's a very dangerous job for the men and women that have to go and do that.
I'm sure.
And so we do it very tactfully so that no members of the household or any members of the community are harmed when we're going in to actually confiscate a firearm. But I can't agree more with the panelists with some of the safety measures that we really need to implement for some gun control. I do think that any individual, I think it's incumbent upon family members and friends to report when there's a change of behavior, even sometimes even a change in medication that's causing someone to act a little differently, to report it. And it's really for their own safety, because the firearm is only confiscated for, I believe, 72 hours until they go before a judge, and the judge will make that final determination. But that can save many, many lives whenever that is issued and we're able to go and confiscate the firearm.
Thank you. That's good to hear, because obviously the task force can only deal with the crimes after they've occurred. We'd like to get to the point where we can prevent these crimes from happening to begin with and lower the lethality of these crimes.
You know, Arrow, the sheriff has a great program too, called the Sandy Hook. I'm sorry, Errol, what is it called? Sandy Hook
It's the
Safety.
Sandy Hook Promise, based on what occurred in Newtown, Connecticut, where tragically the family members, the adults, parents, created this foundation to support, not support gun violence, but to make more awareness of gun violence. And so we've trained over 26,000 kids in Suffolk County in both the Say Something and Start with Hello programs. And it really goes to stop bullying, and also to be able to go to a trusted adult to say something if they were to hear a classmate say something that they were going to harm themselves or harm others, or see something via social media. And so we've really worked hard to try and get into, and thank you for bringing that up, legislator, really worked hard to get into our schools to make a difference in our youth.
It's just another example of of explicitly telling people at the very youngest age, this isn't normal, it's not okay. You should not be a victim of bias, language, action. You should not be afraid because of who you are. And we just can't say it enough, because the history that we're pushing against is so deeply and it's sedimented, especially on Long Island.
Yeah, it's great to hear that you're involved in these kind of programs. It makes me feel very proud to be a part of this community. Another question that came in is, how do you stop xenophobia and hate crimes against immigrants when immigrants are painted with a broad brushstroke as criminals and rapists, and peaceful, productive members of our community who are undocumented but trying to get their papers are yanked out of their homes, tearing families apart?
Well, I can say it was certainly alarming when then future president of the United States called folks from a particular country rapists. It was just alarming. There's nothing else to say about it. And we would hope that we never go back to a time when the leader of our country would be able to spread such, odious kind of hatred against folks because of where they come from. And we certainly have a lot of work to do. At the same time, there are, as you say, Andy, a lot of programs in our communities, folks who are trying to push the right narrative and open our doors. Certainly immigration policy is something that needs full attention. How many decades has it been now that we've been promised comprehensive immigration reform that might put an end to some of the vilification of people who are coming to our country to try to make a better life for themselves and their families. I was glad to see the president, return funding to where it belonged, to fully support our military here in the United States, instead of using it trillions of dollars to build this wall that really served a symbolic purpose in former President Trump's talking points, as really a wall between people, a wall between races, and explicitly looking to establish that wall. I think my dog just came in.
I was wondering if my grandchildren were going to walk in. I think I'm safe at this point.
So we've reached the limit. She's not going to be left out any longer. But at any rate, one would hope that that was a bridge too far and we won't go back there. But I certainly think that having rules in place that, once again, walk back the normalization of inhumane treatment, for instance, separating families at the border, putting children in cage-like structures, sending people back without any kind of fair, efficient adjudication. All of those things, when we see them over and over and over in the press, have a psychological effect, that makes it harder for us to go into the schools and tell kids, look, if somebody attacks you because of the color of your skin, that's wrong. So I think we have to address this at every level of our society. Leaders have to lead, teachers have to teach. We all have to be pulling in the same direction with regard to stepping back from hatred and stepping back from language and acts that tend to separate us and make us feel our differences more than the very many, many more things that make us the same.
Thank you, Bridget. Thank you. Tim, I guess I'll address this last question that I got in advance, and then we'll open it up to the floor. How do you draw the line? You sort of alluded to this before. How do you draw the line between free speech and incitement when you evaluate the elements of a hate crime or a conspiracy to commit a hate crime?
Sure, careful investigation and research, right? So oftentimes, the distinction will be clear. Other times it could be blurred. And it's important that we approach each case without bias and that we thoroughly investigate the case. And that's why we think it's important that the folks who are charged with investigating these incidents have specialized training and that they're experts in the area, that they're focused on hate crimes. We have the specialized task force working with the hate crimes unit, and we're in the process of reaching out to all the local town and village departments to increase training and to ensure that they're working with the hate crimes unit. And then, of course, the research is very important, and ensuring that the prosecutors are specially trained and are doing what's right, bringing just prosecutions and getting the right results in court. There are some incidents, as I made the reference earlier to the dropping of literature that may be filled with hate but yet protected. That's a clear distinction between a crime and the First Amendment. But for sure that there are some cases where the line can be blurred, where you're dealing with a harassment situation as opposed to an assault, which is much clearer. And so we have to do our jobs well. And the way you do that is you put the right people in the right spots, and you make sure that they have the training and the tools that they need to get the job done. There's no easy answers.
Right. Thank you. All right. At this point, I think I'm going to call upon my co-chair, Alyssa, who's been keeping track of the questions, to ask some of the questions that you have out in the audience.
This is a question for Sheriff Tulum. Describe information sharing to you from state and federal investigators about potential hate crime perpetrators in Suffolk County. Is it sufficient?
Yes, absolutely. I have deputy sheriffs and correction officers assigned to various federal, state, and also our district attorney's task force. And so the information sharing, and I would have to say that from what I've heard about the law enforcement community in Suffolk County, we are by far doing a greater job, not only in our district attorney prosecuting crimes, but the information sharing between the police departments, both the town and the Suffolk County Police Department, the District Attorney's Office, and the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office. So I feel that we are at a point where information sharing is probably at its peak. We've assigned really smart individuals to work on these task force, to look at cases very closely, to try and put the pieces of the puzzle together. And no one is really looking for the credit. Whoever gets the credit gets the credit. We just want to make sure our communities are safe.
Fantastic. The next question is, if an employee, this is not directed to anyone in particular, if an employee is receiving anonymous hate text messages at work and it is shared with the employer, what is the employer's obligation in addressing the incident?
Sounds like a question for Andy.
Well, I mean,
I'm
certainly,
fair housing, not labor, but
certainly there are certain obligations upon employers to ensure a non-hostile working environment. And so in certain contexts, they would have an obligation to take certain action. As law enforcement officials, though, I can speak on from a law enforcement perspective, we would hope that that employer and the employee reaches out to law enforcement, the number of different ways that we already detailed earlier.
I think the Human Rights Commission is also a good place to go if there's an immediate threat. Obviously, it's 911, 1-800-TIPS, called the law enforcement, police. But Human Rights Commission does deal directly with employment discrimination and may be helpful in that as well.
And just, the question was framed in anonymous messages. So what may appear to someone as anonymous, law enforcement has tools to investigate and perhaps identify the sender of those messages.
yeah, I would just like to add, even though I was not employment labor, I do believe that that if an employer, it's brought to the attention of an employer that someone feels threatened, they do have an obligation to report it or investigate it, because otherwise they're creating a hostile work environment. And if somebody gets hurt because of that, there could be liability, maybe not criminal liability, but certainly civil liability.
And the Human Rights Commission will certainly help educate an employer along those lines, or guide the employee. Oftentimes people want to do the right thing without knowing what the right thing is. Can I also echo what Tim was saying about the technological capabilities of the District Attorney's Office have really grown by leaps and bounds, supported in part by the legislature. But under this district attorney, Tim has made a huge commitment to optimizing the evidentiary value of technology. And so I would just echo what he says, that if you think something's happening and you think you don't know exactly where it's coming from, his tech, what is the name of your unit? He has a technical unit that
Technical Services Unit.
they can drill into those phones and the computers and the tablets and maybe really be helpful to you.
Yeah, and Legislator Fleming's correct. We got passed through a capital program, the crime fighting technology project, which was supported by Legislator Fleming and many, if not all, of her colleagues, and that's allowed us to purchase cutting edge technology that does just what the legislator said. There's one other issue I would just highlight. We talked about First Amendment versus crimes, and then we just had a question about what sounded like a harassment situation. Remember, threatening someone is not protected speech. Okay, we have laws against that. We actually have a specific hate crime law against that in New York State. It's actually second-degree aggravated harassment. It's found in the penal law at 240-30. And if you're threatening someone on the basis of their protected class, that is a crime.
Okay, this is a question for Tim Sini. How does the County Hate Crimes Unit work with local East End town and village police departments? Do you or the Hate Crimes Unit ever have concerns that hate crimes are not investigated by local police as such? That is, the hate crimes are being missed and not being charged as hate crimes.
One of the reasons we created this task force is to address that exact scenario, so that the smaller departments are supported so that they can properly investigate hate crimes and hate incidents. And we're doing it in two ways. One, we're encouraging local departments to work with the Suffolk County Hate Crimes Unit, which is staffed with experts in the area. And two, we're increasing countywide training. So that is certainly an issue that we're trying to address through the task force.
Okay. This is a question, I don't know who it's for. Gun laws are mostly enforced against people of color. I don't think it's in a person of color's best interest to ask for help, and it being broadcast to everyone doesn't help the best. It doesn't help the best who's in jeopardy. Because it seems there was more about putting a spotlight on the actual than keeping safe. I'm not really sure I understand the question. I don't know if there is a question. So I might just.
I think what the question is getting at is something we talked a little bit about before, which is sometimes people don't feel safe reporting crimes because they are often the victims of crimes, and they don't feel safe in reporting that crime because they feel that they can be either taken advantage of or abused by law enforcement itself. That's the way I heard the question. I don't know if that's the way the rest of you heard it.
I would also encourage folks who do feel that way to talk to the Human Rights Commission and or move through the advisory boards in the numbers that I've given on the chat, because there are ways to interact with law enforcement to ensure, at least in the early stages, that you will be, not exposed more than is necessary. Unfortunately, some of the laws that were passed do kind of force the DA's office to provide information about a victim's identity earlier than they used to be required when I was a sex crimes prosecutor. But I would really urge folks, if you feel that you are being victimized, to come to find someone who you will trust. Call my office. If I can be helpful, I will. Call the Human Rights Commission, call the director of Minority Affairs, find someone whom you trust, but don't hold on to this by yourself, because we're here to be helpful. And I certainly understand skepticism or fear in a history where that might be, justified. But you can see from the law enforcement officials on this call, we're here to be helpful, and I hope that you would find a way to get help if you are being victimized.
It's certainly important, and we know that all of you have stressed it, and I feel comfortable saying that we can all trust you to do the right thing, but it's important to say and to acknowledge that people feel that sometimes if they report a crime, that they will be treated as the perpetrators rather than the victims because of color or other protected categories. So we need to acknowledge that and try to help resolve that and get past that.
The next question is, are all employees of the Sheriff's Department, the DA's office, as well as the county legislator and their staff given a course in implicit bias and diversity? And if not, will they implement it?
So the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office has implemented a fair and impartial policing training to all of its staff, and that's including correction officers, deputy sheriffs, and also our civilian personnel. We're just completing the civilian personnel portion of the course. We're looking to see how we can get better engagement, because we don't want this just to be an annual course and 365 days later they go through it. This is something that they have to live, feel, and breathe and eat this basically every single day while they're employed by the sheriff's office. One of the things that we've experienced, we had an employee, and I'm sorry to say, he's no longer an employee, that was actively recruiting for the KKK. And so we were able to, working with the federal authorities that brought it to our attention because he came under their radar. He's no longer employed by the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office, but these things do occur. And I'm not ashamed to talk to all of you about this, nor admit that we are still working through a lot of different issues. And we were able to at least have this individual no longer employed by the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office.
That's great. Thank you.
So in the DA's office, we have a countywide program that Legislator Fleming, I'm sure, can talk about, that we all participate in. But we also are developing a new program, and it really gets at what Sheriff Toulon was saying. We don't want just a sort of a one day out of the year seminar on implicit bias. So we're working with experts throughout the country, including non-governmental organizations, academia, including the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, the Vera Institute, community groups, the county, and we're really hoping to offer something that's extremely constructive for the members of the office. This is a very interesting field. I'm not sure how many folks have ever gotten into the weeds on implicit bias, but it's extremely interesting. And it really is, it should not be a quote unquote training. It should really be a series of conversations, workshops. The idea is to get to the root of, or at least get to a consensus that we all have certain biases, and we need to educate ourselves, obviously, to try to erode away at those biases, but also in some instances, we simply need to be aware of them so that we can correct for them. I participated in this study at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, which was fascinating. They'd give you a set of factual scenarios, and they're all personal. So it'd be you need life-saving surgery, and here are 5 doctors that you have to choose from, and here's a bio on each. Pick your doctor, and it really illustrated the biases that people evinced, whether it was people valued an Ivy League education, or people had some sort of implicit racial bias, or just how someone looked, because you get to see the photo. So I think it's a very interesting area that we need to be delving into intensely.
We at the county have sexual harassment training that's mandated across the board. But with regard to, and your normal orientation training includes discrimination training, but I think we can do a better job along with some other female legislators. I did co-sponsor legislation that would require better reporting than we had, and we'll have to see how that really, how effective that really is. But I believe that we could certainly do better.
There's a question. Thank you all for your answers on that. I've heard a lot about issues with non-English speaking people not being able to communicate about a crime. What does this county have in place to accommodate this issue?
So we have a robust language access plan in Suffolk County. It's actually been sort of put out there as the gold standard. We have, obviously, one way is we have folks who are certified interpreters who can interpret. We have bilingual members of the police departments who can interpret. And then we have a service where we contract with a company, and they do real-time translation. We use headsets, we use cell phones, we have it hooked up to certain desks, landlines. The issue is not with the policy and the program. It's actually, I think, a pretty robust one. It's compliance. That's the issue. Ensuring that people are complying with the program, and not using their 10th grade Spanish to communicate with a sex victim about a very sensitive issue. So it's really it's a matter of compliance. And when I was police commissioner, we actually did sting operations to ensure compliance with the language access plan. And that's that's not the entire solution, but that we take this very seriously, and we need to do more in terms of compliance.
I think the Department of Justice did quite a bit actually to push Suffolk County law enforcement along after the murder of Marcelo Lucero. There was an extensive examination by the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division with regard to bias against certain victims or certain classes of victims. And as a result of that, there is a consent letter. Is it, Tim? I think it's
it's entitled settlement agreement.
That's like a consent order, but it's in letter form that requires that Suffolk County Police Department meet certain metrics. They have literally a scorecard or a report card that's not quite complete, but it definitely did push Suffolk County law enforcement in the right direction. And now, what is it, almost 11 years later, you've got the circumstance that Tim is describing, which is really very forward thinking relative to where they were before Mr. Lucero lost his life in that crime in Patchogue. Another thing that's really that with regard to compliance, when you're out, when a police officer is in the street and trying to solve something, trying to get evidence and information very quickly, it is a challenge not to rely on practices that could be quite damaging. And I think what Tim is alluding to is their training is really getting better and better at that. What I was always concerned about as a DA was children being recruited to do translating because they're there
100%.
and
Yep.
they're a family member, and oftentimes the trauma, I think in recent years we've recognized that the trauma that can be visited on a child who's required to translate in a traumatic moment for her family is really hard to overcome. So
I think that's a great example, and I think it shows the complexity of this issue, right? So put yourself in everyone's situation, right? You have a police officer responding to a domestic incident, and he or she is trying to get to the bottom of what's happening. It's real time, it's a chaotic situation, and they have a bilingual child there who can help in their mind get to the bottom of it. But then switch roles. Can you imagine being that child and essentially translating for a police officer to figure out why dad beat mom? It's incredibly difficult, and that's why we have to make sure our police officers are given the tools that they need. So in a situation like that, they should have a cell phone in every single sector car where they can get on that phone and they can contact Language Line, which is the company that we use, and they can do the translation. And look, I get it. It's really tough for the officers in a chaotic situation like that to utilize this program. Look, in real emergency situations, you got to do to keep people safe. We don't expect police officers to, put a bunch of headsets on in an emergency situation. But where, when the dust settles and you're starting to interview witnesses, compliance with this program is very important. It's important because it treats people with the respect and dignity they deserve. It's also important from my standpoint because then the evidence is better, right? We have actually what was said and not someone's elementary understanding of a foreign language.
And of course, that speaks to the importance of diversity in the police department. And I know
100%.
Tim's worked very hard on that. Errol's worked very hard on that. We all have. We were asked at the legislature to support Tim's request to waive certain residency requirements for young district attorneys coming in, because it's challenging to find native Spanish speakers or people who have a cultural affinity with the folks that they're going to be policing. But clearly it's true. I think it's true across the board. It's true in the legislature. It's true in the White House. It's true wherever you are. The more diverse you are, the stronger you are, the better information you have, the better communication you have, the less damage you do. So, but that you do see an effort now, I think, in the police department, in the DA's office, in the sheriff's office, to work very, very hard against those odds of 80% white in the community. But you need to continue to push and implement policies that'll ensure growing diversity in all of our law enforcement.
Yeah, the more Spanish speakers we have in law enforcement, the better. In Suffolk County, we have a growing Latino population. And so two things. One, Legislator Fleming's reference to the residency issue has worked. We've been able to recruit and hire a number of individuals who are bilingual in a number of languages, but particularly Spanish. And I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but I think it's something in the 20% of our new hires, they are bilingual. And on the police department side, we have a program that's the result of a consent decree that dates back to the 80s. And it allows the police department to hire off a Spanish-speaking list, which I've always said is one of the best tools the department has, because the way we hire police officers, for better or for worse, it's off a civil service list, right? They take a test, they get a score, the people with certain scores get banded, and then it's a lottery system. The one exception is that if you're in the military, you get 5 extra points. And the other exception is the Spanish speaking list, where the police department is allowed, and I think mandated, to hire 10% of the class off of that Spanish speaking list. So it really has allowed the department to increase the number of Spanish speaking officers dramatically.
So in the consciousness of time, I always like to end on time, and it's almost 8:15. I would like to ask each one of you, if you had to leave us with one thing that we can do tomorrow, what would you say that we can do to help?
I'm never shy to go first. I mean, I would say you need to continue talking. You need to keep speaking up. I think that's what the essay that Errol shared talks about, is the importance of not being silent. And this is a great example, but we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of work to do together, but we have to hit these issues head on, be explicit about what the problems are, be realistic about what the challenges are, but continue to talk to one another about how we can move forward.
Of course, I agree with all that. Just from a very practical perspective, what I would say is that the vast majority of law enforcement officials are trying to do the right thing. And what I would say to you, it's that, if there is an issue in your community, say there is an incident that you believe was not properly investigated, it's okay to speak up and let folks know, whether it's my office or whether it's the Human Rights Commission, and it needs to be addressed. And it doesn't necessarily mean someone tried to, it's not necessarily intentional misconduct. It could be a training issue. Look, we're all human beings. It could be that particular investigator or officer is having a bad day, or was swamped, had too many calls, or whatever the case may be. I'm concerned that in today's society, we're so quick to rush to judge and not try to address the actual problem that's before us. So I would just encourage everyone to continue to work together to solve these complex problems.
And I couldn't agree with both our district attorney Cindy and legislator Fleming. But more importantly, I would ask that everyone not only continue to talk to us, but assist us in creating a more diverse workforce. Whether you have ideas, we have a community advisory board in the sheriff's office. Everyone here is more than welcome to join that advisory board, whether you want to make one meeting or every meeting that we have. But assist us in helping to create the most diverse workforce in Suffolk County that we can have.
With that, I think we should probably wrap it up. Bridget, Tim, Errol, I just want to thank you so much on behalf of everybody who's on this call, for coming tonight to speak with us, because as one of you said, communication is key. We have to keep talking. We have to keep learning, and this is a very important topic, and I hope this is just one of many more conversations that we'll have. And thank you also for all you do for our county to help improve the quality of life for the people who live here. We are truly appreciative. Before we leave, can each of you just let our audience know if they have further questions or want to talk to you about something that we discussed tonight, what is the best way to reach each of you?
I'll put my email in the chat. It's bridget.fleming@suffolkcountiny.gov, and my office number in Sag Harbor. You could also just walk over to 75 Washington Street, 631-852-8400.
For my office, you can email us at info.da@suffolkcountiny.gov. You can email us specific questions, but also if you're looking to partner with the office in some way, if you're a member of a community group or civic organization, whatever the case may be, that's a great way to reach out to us, and we'll have someone get back to you.
For me, you can reach out to me on our Suffolk County Sheriff website. It's Suffolk/Sheriff at SuffolkNewYork.com. But if you go to our website, you can fill out a information sheet, and it will come right directly to me. And if you want any member of the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office to, when we can have in-person meetings, whether it's myself or any members, we would be happy to participate and continue the discussion.
Great. Thank you all again so much. And thanks to all of you who participated in our conversation tonight. Have a good evening,
Great
everybody.
event.
Thank you
so
very much.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.